Hello and welcome everyone today to the Healthy Rebel Speaks Out podcast. And today's episode, we are going to delve into the interconnections between insulin resistance, menopause, and obesity. And we're joined by an esteemed guest, Bett Murray, a powerhouse of nutritional expertise, functional medicine, and research. With her Ph.D. research shedding light on the hormonal and metabolic imbalances afflicting women over 40, Bett has become a beacon for those seeking to reclaim their health and vitality. Her Hormone Reset Program is a testament to her commitment to helping women effortlessly lose weight, balance hormones, and boost energy without the constraints of rigorous diets. Well, welcome, Bett, to the show. I'm so happy you are here. And I thought we could begin by just, you tell us little bit about what inspired you and why this particular topic is, you're very passionate about it.
Sure. Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Bonnie, for having me. I'm happy to be here. And, I think like most people that are in this community, the functional medicine, integrative alternative community, myself and the vast majority of us came to it because we had a health problem that conventional medicine either didn't have an answer for, or we found the answer inadequate. As a kid, I was a pretty healthy kid overall, although I was a kid with a sensitive stomach. And I use the air quotes around that because for those of us that had, grew up in the 70s, your parents pretty much were like, if a limb didn't fall off, you were okay, right? So nobody really paid attention to it when I was younger. But when I got into college, I would have these episodes of pretty bad digestive problems. They would come and go, and I sort of chalked it up to the kegger I went to or, the dumb food I was eating. But when I got into my 20s, and I had multiple careers, but I was in IT at the time, working 100 hours a week. My digestive problems went like through the roof. And, so I finally end up going, okay, I'm going to go see a gastroenterologist. And I end up being diagnosed with colitis. And I thought I was asking what was a legitimately, reasonable question. I said, could there be anything to do with my diet with an autoimmune digestive disorder? And this very overweight man, gastroenterologist, barked this big laugh in my face, and said, has nothing to do with what you're eating. So I obviously had a few choice words for that, but I looked at him and I was like, okay, obviously, if I don't eat symptomatically, my problems get better, right? But you can't just starve yourself. And so that sort of led me back to school, and back into a master's program, into a healthcare, all these different things, because I just wanted to figure out how to help me. And then when I landed there, I was like, oh my God, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. So I was able to get my health kind of back under control, my digestive stuff, my autoimmune condition went into remission, but I enter into my late 30s, right? And at the time I got a tubal because I didn't want to be on birth control. I got a tubal, and everyone told me everything would be completely normal. Like, it does nothing to you. But I can tell you now, looking back on it, I pushed me into perimenopause kind of early on. So I had well over a decade of hormone issues that showed up. Started with like acne. I started gaining weight. I started having hair loss. I used to joke that I looked like the Budweiser lizard because my eyes would be really puffy. And, I'd already gone into this field. So I was already in nutrition. I'm already working with some of the luminaries in functional medicine. And everybody's, looking at me saying, oh, what's your hormones? And we're playing with it, but I don't get any better. And so, through my 40s, I was really struggling with all these hormonal imbalances and just throwing hormones at it, because I do what a lot of people do. You bioidentical thyroid, this progesterone didn't help it. And that's what prompted me to go back to school, is I was like, I need to understand more than just replace the hormones when they start to get weird. And so now I have really honed in. I'm almost 54. I'll be 54 next month. And I feel better today than I did at 38. I'm in better health. Everything about my body is better at a time period when it's usually the opposite. And so for me, a lot of it was digging through that research and understanding not only the metabolic issues that happen with menopause, but how our body detoxifies it, how our microbiome plays a role. And so that's how I ended up here. It was this very sort of circuitous route that I think a lot of us take.
Yeah, no, I love it. I mean, what you're speaking to me is the individualized prescriptions and the nuance about, how our bodies change. And I think that people are not really appreciating that they had all this dysfunction, and then menopause and the hormones come in, and then it's like the perfect storm. So and along those lines, yes, I would love to hear your opinion on this whole discussion about insulin resistance, and it being, the root cause of all of our metabolic dysfunction, and certainly a driver a lot of our chronic modern day diseases as well.
Absolutely. So if you look at the statistics today, it is presumed, depending on who you read, that about 88% of Americans are at least insulin resistant. And if you look at our waistlines, we're either overweight or obese. So we have an epidemic of, metabolic disorders that are very westernized. You don't see this in non-westernized countries. So it's huge. But what's interesting is if you couple that with what happens to women, so on average, for every year, every decade after 20, we lose 5% of our metabolic rate as women, statistically, right? That's in the research. So that's essentially a slowing of our metabolism as we move through fertility to, I guess, infertility because of age, because of the onset of menopause. And the average woman gains 10 to 15% of their body mass after menopause, right? So in that transition period and after, so that means the average 150-pound woman is going to gain 15 to 20 to 25 pounds just by going through the transition, right? So we have insulin resistance that's driving a lot of that. And then we have the uniqueness of women's hormones, right? The thing is I think we oversimplify insulin resistance. Right? Because if it was just that one thing and it's super simple, then everybody would probably do one diet that, drove towards insulin sensitivity, and everybody would get better.
Could you mind taking a moment just to explain? I was thinking for some people who may not be that familiar with the word insulin resistance.
Yeah. So insulin is produced by the pancreas, and it's produced in response to several things. The first thing it's produced is in response to your carbohydrate content of your meal. So depending on how many carbohydrates you have, so that's everything from vegetables and fruit, legumes, grains, to your processed foods like breads, crackers, those kind of things. And obviously the more processed, the faster those become sugar, so the more insulin you produce. So insulin really is the controller for the level of glucose and blood sugar in your bloodstream. So at any given time, the human body keeps about a teaspoon of blood sugar circulating. So if you were to extract it all out and put it in a container, it'd be a teaspoon. So anything above that in a very large amount or in a very fast to digest amount is going to cause a real big rise in insulin, right? So when we look at obesity, when you have carbohydrate content or glucose levels that drive insulin up, insulin can only do two things. It either takes that content right now to the cell to burn, or it's going to drive it to the fat to store. So I sort of joke with people that if you're eating a Krispy Kreme, you better be running with it, because the only way that Krispy Kreme is not going to go to your butt is if you are currently needing to burn it, right? So insulin drives weight gain. And if you don't produce insulin, type 1 diabetics, for example, that keep a tight control of the insulin that they do use, generally don't gain weight, because they don't have insulin naturally being produced. So insulin drives fat weight gain. Now, the problem is when we eat the standard American diet, we're getting very high amounts of carbs, and then we get very high insulin behind it. So we get into a state where you need more and more insulin for your body to get the blood sugar into the cell to burn. And that basically makes you store fat first. So it's kind of like turning a dial. Instead of using 70% of what you eat as fuel, it says, okay, I'm going to use 30% and I'm going to store the rest. But the other thing is really large meals will cause an insulin response. Really high protein meals, so very large protein boluses of food, will also cause insulin response. Generally, fats do not do that, but they have their own host of issues. It's not necessarily that everybody can eat a high fat diet, low carb, and lose weight. But for most of us, we're driving this on a regular basis and we don't know it.
Yeah, and also to add to that, I would mention the fact that your glucose levels can be normal for years as insulin in the background is going up and up for like 20 years. And so I just think this is important, that this is something that people don't always test on regular blood tests, beyond like getting your A1C, which is like your blood sugar, over 3 months. I mean, you don't want to wait until, we got insulin resistance, basically.
Right. Yeah. Because A1C and a fasting glucose high, that means you've got decades of problems. That doesn't happen overnight. And unfortunately, we don't do preventative things to look for these problems before they become a problem. So insulin resistance definitely drives weight gain. And as women, we have, especially when we're in our 40s, when our estrogen levels are wildly fluctuating and often elevated relative to progesterone, which is the other hormone that sort of counterbalances it, because progesterone declines earlier, which is why we see fertility issues as we get older. So when progesterone declines and estrogen's still cycling, we end up often in an estrogen dominant state. And estrogen will drive more insulin resistance at the cells and will drive that sort of bust. So a lot of women could be doing in their 40s what worked in their 20s and 30s to maintain body composition or lose weight. And all of a sudden it stops working.
You're right, because it's actually protective. And I didn't realize that how much the metabolism goes down. And is that just due to the hormones? Because I always thought it's also due to loss of muscle is a big factor as well.
Both. We see both. So definitely if we lose skeletal, particularly skeletal muscle, but all lean muscle mass, because muscle is our metabolic engine, right? So it's every pound of muscle we can put on can burn an easy, 90 to 150 calories a day. So we do tend to lose a little bit of muscle mass along that, especially if we aren't weight training. But the other side of it is estrogen affects the glucose transport and other aspects of your body, either burning fat or sugar. And so estrogen very much is kind of like Goldilocks. I don't want too much, and I also don't want too little. And when we're in the sweet spot, estrogen can help sort of balance that leanness, right? But when we're in those two fluctuation points, we can have things get driven that we don't want driven. So as women, we have a double whammy, which makes it harder for us to manage compared to a man.
Yeah, I think almost every week I have someone coming into my office saying, I don't know what happened. I'm eating the same food. I'm engaging in the same activity. What's going on here? Like, I have this middle section that won't go away. And again, it's been my opinion that perhaps, there was gut issues, and, exposure to all of these xenoestrogens. And that, and all of a sudden, like I said, it's like the perfect storm. When we don't have that estrogen anymore, to protect us. Would you think that's part of this story?
For sure. I mean, definitely toxins can lead to that. The thing is our fat cells become little 3-mile islands, right? Our body stores our toxins in there. So a lot of times we have a harder time losing weight just because the body's like, I'm not opening up that storage shed. I don't want to know what's in there, right? So toxicity and xenoestrogens, but the gut is a really interesting thing. So a big part of my Ph.D. research was looking at our hormones, how we metabolize them, and the microbiome. So literally, I probably know more about that than probably anybody on the planet at this point, because that was part of my dissertation. Here's the thing that was very interesting, right? So if we look at the two drugs that are really popular now, particularly when we talk about weight loss, like semaglutide, which is Wegovy, and then tirzepatide, which is known as Mounjaro. What's interesting about those is those are drugs that have their primary action in the digestive tract. But they affect insulin production and insulin sensitivity outside, but the mechanism is inside the gut. Right, which is why we see so many digestive problems. It's semaglutide has a lot of digestive problems with nausea, a lack of hunger, particularly for protein, digestive, even things like gastroparesis, which is slow moving of the digestion because it shuts down the movement of the gut, the motor complex. And tirzepatide works similarly, but slightly different. So what's really interesting is, if we look at, like, my dad was overweight in the 80s, right? So early 80s. He was kind of, he was one of the few, if you looked around back then, there wasn't a lot of people that were overweight. We were already eating crappy food, right? We already had better living by chemistry from the 50s.
Yes.
So you look at it and you go, okay, what changed? Because it was the late 80s that changed, right? So we had a lot of changes to our food, and we can go into that. But we have an extraordinary increase in things like antibiotics in animal feed, antibiotic use. As a matter of fact, we are all taking antibiotics every day, but we're getting it from the animals that we eat because they were giving it. Right. So what we don't know is what has radically changed in our microbiome because we didn't have the capacity to test for it. So what's interesting is a bunch of your different gut bugs stimulate that GLP and GIP-1 receptors. So for everybody, that geek speak means those are the receptors that those drugs, tirzepatide and semaglutide, work on. So maybe part of our obesity epidemic is insulin resistance that's coming from the gut because of microbiome changes. And if our gut was healthier, we wouldn't have the obesity problem because those drugs are not working on the pancreas and are not working on insulin. They're in the gut.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. And just thinking of all the stuff I just think about when we think about the guts, I feel like how much we have learned also from what they feed to our animals and how they figured out that there was actually a synergistic effect between the high carbohydrates like the soy and the corn and then those dangerous oils, but how it became it enabled these animals to gain weight as quickly as possible. And then we decided, we're going to jump on the bandwagon here and start eating these. And then this is even before, because it wasn't until the 90s that we had the introduction of the GMOs. Yep. So I mean, and how, well, you could speak to this a lot better, but just the explosion of not just GI issues, neurological issues, and I can imagine hormones as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, GMOs and having feedlot animals eat things that wouldn't normally be in their diet, and then feeding them antibiotics. So antibiotics are given so they get fatter, right? Just so they get fatter, so they're heavier. And the heavier the cow is, the more money I make if I'm the rancher. So we have all of that, and all of this stuff is foreign to our body. We weren't designed to metabolize these things, and so when it gets into our body, it messes with all of that mechanism. So when people look at, can I make differences in how I feel in my body? That's why organic matters. That's why grass-fed, grass-finished, free-range animals matter, because we have less toxicity from them than we would from conventional things, because those things make our metabolism work ineffectively.
Yeah, so I mean, I think you would agree. I think we have been like victims of our environment. And so to me, the message to, anyone listening, but obviously women going through menopause, like, yeah, you are eating the same foods. And so we really need to look at it as you mentioned, like the obesity, it's really the side effect of what's going on, as opposed to is what causing it. And so I would wish to, and I'd like you to speak to this too, taking away this like guilt or responsibility, like I let myself go, because I feel people are just been given the wrong information, and it's the whole environment we're living in.
Absolutely. Oprah had a article, it was about 2 or 3 weeks ago, talking about quit gaslighting around weight and saying it's a willpower problem. It's a you can't control yourself problem, because we know today it's a hormone problem. It's a metabolism problem. It's also a brain and neurochemistry problem, right? So anybody that's struggling with their weight, know that it is biochemical. It is not because you're gluttonous and don't have willpower. Anybody that has done a serious diet has extraordinary willpower, right? It's not really that. The challenge is particularly as we go through this transition and our hormones are changing, often what may have worked when we were 20 or 30, when our hormones were all really well balanced, may not work as well today. In my 20s and early 30s, I was into bodybuilding. So I was eating a ton of protein, low carb. I was going through the contest prep kind of diets where you do crazy stuff, things that aren't really good for you to lean out, but you don't know any better. You're dumb. You're in your 20s. You're like, I'm going to do it. And, so I understood how to put muscle on and keep it on. But I can tell you, when I went into that late 30s, 40s, that same diet, that same exercise did not do the same thing. Right. So we have to understand that, and we have to recognize that you're in a unique position right now, and we might need a different set of tools than one worked before.
Right. No, I agree. I would say that everyone that comes in that, I would say it's very typical, wants to lose 30 pounds or something. But they're not eating a lot of calories. And I point it out to them. But it's what they are eating or what they're not giving their bodies and all of that. And, to me, that is the place to start, of course, because it's my job with the diet. But absolutely, I send them to people like yourselves to tweak the whole hormone thing. But yeah, maybe you could speak about your process when people come into your clinic and how because it sounds like there is quite a bit of nuance there. I mean, I think there are basics, obviously, like the grass-fed meat and wild fish where you get your protein from. But okay.
Yeah, definitely. So one of the things that I thought was very interesting is, I started digging in the research and looking at, because I was almost always on a high protein diet, right? And then I tried keto, I tried some other things, and, genetically we may be better at certain things. So I'll give an example. I'm a carrier of a gene called ApoA2. I carry 2 copies of that, which means I hyperabsorb saturated fat from the diet. So when I tried keto, I gained weight. Despite the fact that my insulin was almost non-existent, it was so very low. It's because I hyperabsorbed saturated fats and my liver went and produced fat out of it, right? Because your liver can produce fat, your liver can produce carbs or glucose. And so genetically, we might be wired a little differently. So sometimes we look at genes to see kind of where you lie. What I thought was also really interesting is when you look in the literature, people that have always maintained leanness. So a lot of the studies you have to recognize are done on college students. Right? That's a problem because they're looking at, people who are 18 to 25, many of which are still healthy, even though they may not be eating healthy. Now that's changing. We see a population of children and young adults that are not as healthy as our predecessors. However, they're more metabolically sound. Well, one of the things I came across in the research, because I kept looking at it going, okay, I'm eating high protein. I can't be my insulin. It shouldn't be my insulin. Well, somebody who's been overweight, right? So I spent most of my 40s struggling with my weight in all honesty. And so this is the reality as a nutrition and functional medicine practitioner. In my 40s, I would not work with weight loss. Autoimmune, complex health problems, hormones all day long. I hated weight loss because I myself was struggling with my weight. And I was like, okay, if I can't fix this, what makes you think I can fix it for you, right? Now, I've since lost all that weight and I maintain it without having to starve myself, without having to remove carbs from my diet. But at the time, I was struggling. And so, if I kind of flash back and look at that, I was like, okay, what worked for me when I was, in my 30s isn't working anymore, but the diet hasn't changed. So I started looking at the research, and when somebody has always been the same weight, they have very strong muscle protein synthesis, right? So their muscles are very efficient at using what they need. They're very efficient at building muscle. They're also very efficient at taking proteins and breaking it down and doing muscle protein synthesis. So what that means is their body takes the protein that they eat, and the vast majority of it, or at least a significant portion of it, is getting used to make muscle. Now, for everybody listening, you won't do that by doing just a tiny bit of Pilates for 20 minutes on a video or walking. That you gotta lift some heavy metal, right? We gotta do some weight training. But if you have been overweight, so if you yo-yoed a lot, or if you all of a sudden gained weight and you've been packing, let's say, because I had an extra 30 pounds I could not get rid of, right? If you've been overweight for a long time, what the literature shows is that amino acid metabolism, so how your body metabolizes protein, alters. It alters. So what that means is instead of your body taking it and building muscle, your body will take it to the liver, use it as raw material to make glucose. So what I think is happening is in somebody who struggled with their weight, that mechanism is kind of turned on, right? Their body's actually doing that. So if you're somebody that's eating high protein, low carb, you're like, I'm controlling my insulin, but I seem to still gain weight, you may have a problem with your liver actually using it as what they call substrate. And we have to get the muscle protein synthesis turned back on, and we have to sort of shift that, because if you've been overweight, it doesn't work the same as if you've always been lean.
This is fascinating, I have to tell you. Now, and I always think about it that obviously the body wants to protect itself. And so if it's used to starving all the time, it really doesn't want to build the most metabolically active tissue. So would you agree? Is that what you've come to that conclusion? That's the reason. I always say, like, if you don't use it with exercise, it's like we know bed rest or fall or any of those things. I mean, within weeks, your body's like, get rid of this muscle. So when we're looking at it through survival lens and starvation and dieting and all of this stuff, and I'm just thinking about what I did in my 20s. Oh my God. And I had PCOS, and I had my own little struggles as well with all the hormone imbalances. So that is fascinating. So then how do you correct this?
Yeah. So, so what you said is absolutely correct. The body is going to build muscle when it has the right messengers, right? So even people's cortisol. So here's the other thing. If you are stressed out all the time, you're not sleeping well, you're burning the candle at both ends, you are essentially telling your body hormonally all day, every day, I am starving on the Serengeti. And that message is going to make you hyperinsulinic. So every time you eat, insulin's going to fly up. It's going to mobilize everything, take it to the liver to store it, and it's going to store it as fat. Because the body doesn't know your stress as you're sitting in a Zoom meeting and you've got something else that you need to do, whatever your story is. It thinks you're starving. We're mammals, and that's a mechanism of mammalian starvation. Cortisol high, insulin high, fat storage. And so that's a huge part of what we see. So we have to work on that. We have to fix the sleep. We have to do all that other stuff, because at the end of the day, I don't think a person that gets 3.5, 4 hours of sleep and likes to work 100 hours a week and goes to the gym for an hour is going to lose weight just by doing diet alone and exercise. It's not enough. So especially as you get older. So part of it, we have to look at all of those pieces. So we do a lot of sleep studies and other stuff to really guarantee we know what's going on there. So the other side of that is, like you said, it's a protective mechanism. So the body has the capacity to make sugar out of the liver when it needs it, because the brain needs it. There are parts of the brain that can't even use ketones. Right? There are red blood cells that have to have glucose. So our body has the capacity to do this. Well, the other thing that I thought was interesting is when you're going into menopause, so 40s to 50s, that mechanism gets turned up because of changes of estrogen receptor activity in the liver. So we see more of that in women. So a lot of times we have to kind of assess where you are on that thing, doing things like a glucose to insulin tolerance test to see where your insulin goes, because a fasting one may not even be relatively good enough. So if you're fasting and I come in and do a blood test to look at your insulin, it may be normal. What we want to know is, what does it do when you eat? Do you recommend CGMs? Because that's become really huge. I love CGMs. The challenge is, so my dream, any nerd listening that does device manufacturing, what I want is an insulin continuous monitor. That's what we need, because the continuous glucose monitor, because the reality is your glucose may look pretty normal, because again, your liver has the capacity to make glucose for you. So we may not see wild swings unless you eat really badly, right? Or you might see highs. That's all meaningful. But like I had somebody, here's a really good example. I had somebody who was doing a 5-day fast. They're hardcore fasters. They're comfortable with it. They're used to it. What was really interesting to me is this person had worn a CGM before, wore the CGM during the fast, and her blood glucose never went below like 98. No consumption of calories.
For how many days?
5 days.
5 days.
Water only.
I mean, how many days is your body able to before it gets through all your glycogen or what's in your liver? I'm guessing.
Very short. I mean, even if you look at Walter Longo's work, who's the foremost expert in fasting, even somebody with a low metabolic rate, usually by day 3, we see significant ketones, right? So that she was producing ketones, but her body was controlling that blood sugar behind it and manufacturing it when it needed it. And
so you think she was breaking down muscle perhaps?
Probably. It's hard to tell because it's not long enough to really. In a healthy adult, you wouldn't necessarily, even if you put them on bioimpedance, you wouldn't probably see it. But to me, that's very interesting, because we should see some fluctuation, maybe down to 80 and up, but there really wasn't. And it was really interesting, which is part of the reason why we did it, because it was like, it never really fluctuated for her. And I can only extrapolate because unfortunately we don't have good research into this. We don't have a good way to test it. But the only thing we could surmise is that, yes, she was producing ketones because otherwise she would have just felt terrible. But her body was also maintaining a glucose level by gluconeogenesis, which is the action at the liver producing glucose on its own. Because we have to be able to do that or we would die.
You're right. It does make you question, though, everyone going on some of these longer fasts, and that it may not be the best thing for everyone. Right. I mean, it could be, unless you are healthy and things are working. I just think it just, as with everything, there is more to the story with putting some of these seemingly easy interventions, like just don't eat, into place. Because, like what I always tell people for weight loss, and I think you could speak to this as well, is that in order to lose weight, we need to make you healthier first. So bringing that inflammation down. And like you were talking about with the stress, I mean, how many people from COVID gained, not eating any, like 30 pounds? I had quite a few of those people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So it's, the thing is everybody focuses on the weight. Like I talked to a woman today, a client, and she's like, her doctor told her, oh, you need to lose weight. Like that was the first part of the conversation. I was like,
it doesn't work like that.
No. And I was like, the weight is a symptom of the issue. It is not the issue. Right. And like high cholesterol. Okay, everybody, high cholesterol and arterial plaquing is your body doing the right thing to take care of something today that's going to cause a problem tomorrow. There are 320 different reasons why you might have high cholesterol, all of which are reparative to the body to some degree, other than the people who are genetically hypercholesterolemic. So we look at all of these things that we label as disease states or conditions, not recognizing that they are symptoms of the body doing something that it thinks it's protective, right? The weight is a sign that there's something wrong. We need to work on the underlying reasons why it's wrong. And then the body will lose weight. The problem is especially most females, I've been here, you don't come out of the bodybuilding world without being kind of crazy about food, right? That as soon as you start to gain weight, you think, I got to cut back more. I got to cut out more. I got to do more, or I got to go to the gym more. And what we don't realize is that may be driving all the wrong things at the wrong time.
Right. You might need to do nothing. I mean, actually, it's funny you say that. I was actually, in the 90s, I was a personal trainer for 4.5 years. I did not do the bodybuilding thing, but everyone in the gym there in New York City, they were all bodybuilders. And they were all had eating disorders and just like obsessed with weighing their meat. And I'll never forget this one woman, I'll tell you. I mean, because it's not normal. After the show, she gained like 20 pounds in 3 days. Mm-hmm. She had decreased the salt so much and then was like power eating bagels and
starving.
It was starving. So, I mean, I think it comes back. I do way, way less. And I don't know what your recommendations are with your patients, but, I mean, back when you and I grew up, it was, calories in, calories out, chronic cardio. I do way less than I did when I was growing up. I do like 30, 40 minutes a day compared to like 3 hours. I'm not kidding.
Totally. Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's a metabolic, there's a hormonal and metabolic effect of exercise. Because the truth is you could still gain weight on 800 calories. So the calories in, calories out is complete BS. Like anybody tells you that, just call them stupid and tell them they need to go back to school, because we know better now. That has been debunked 1,000 times over. Your microbiome alone will change how fast you metabolize foods and change how fast your blood sugar rises. So it's not that simple. We're not a kilometer, which is an oven. So the reality is, in most cases, the things that we're doing, like the hours of cardio or whatever, are counterproductive. Because again, depending on what's happening and what we're doing, we might be driving hormones that are telling the body something else. So, back in the day, it's funny because I did triathlons. I got fatter doing triathlons. I did Olympic distance. That is just under Ironman distance. And I got fatter. I'm like, oh my God, I am burning like 1,800 calories a day. How is that possible? I was like, I got fatter because my stress hormones were crazy, right? But what was interesting to me is the leanest I ever was. Now, granted, I was doing a lot with my diet at the time. All I did was lift weights. Like my cardio was walking to and from the car. Now I know my genetics are such that my body has the muscle power gene. My body likes that kind of stuff. I don't do well. I actually cardiovascular risk and everything else. I shouldn't be doing long-term cardio. Now that doesn't mean I don't move, but I do what we call zone 2 training, right? So I move, but I do it at a low intensity, and I only do that once or twice a week, and I lift weights, and I do about 20 minutes a couple times a week. Like literally, I knock it out, I make it work, and I make it worthwhile, and that's it, you know?
I think it's crazy, and this calorie thing, I still can't get people to stop counting them when they come in sometimes.
Yeah.
It's like it's so, and the point system, which is still out there, and it is so counterproductive. But so just thinking about like the long distance runners, and I mean, again, I think the body is protecting itself. They actually have less muscle and more visceral fat. And so, I mean, if you're going to do anything, at least for me, I suggest doing the intervals. Mm-hmm. It's like bang for the buck, because, well, for one thing, I mean, it is one of the top ways also to build your mitochondria, which is something we did not speak about today.
Yeah, we will.
But now is the segue to talk about the powerhouse of the cells, of where we do oxidize fat, FYI. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. So like you said, high intensity intervals, like make it matter, make it count. But here's the thing, high intensity intervals, when you start exceeding 20, 30 minutes of total effort, really the studies show about 15 of total effort, meaning interval, calm down, we start to lose value, right? So the people that are going and doing high intensity intervals for an hour, you really actually overdid it, and it was zero benefit in that last probably 20 minutes, right? So high intensity intervals are a great way to, use your time efficiently and get the maximum bang for your buck, because it stimulates your body to actually burn carbohydrates while you're exercising and burn fat when you're not. And the truth about that is you want to be able to burn fat when you're not moving, right? Because that's actually where fat burning happens. It happens while we sleep.
Yes, that's what I tell people all the time, is that you don't build muscle in the gym. Yeah. You're doing it when you are sleeping.
Yeah. So, and it's through respiration. So we actually burn fat through breathing, right? Yes. So we have to be breathing. I know, it's like, oh gosh, So yeah, our powerhouses inside our cell are responsible for all of that activity, and what we eat and how we eat can make an impact on that. Our hormones make an impact on whether those powerhouses work. Toxicities do. Lots of things can drive imbalances there that can cause damage and make them work less efficiently.
Yeah, I feel like there's a tremendous amount of research, going into the mitochondria as the root of, all these neurological conditions, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, which I've worked with this population quite a bit myself. Mm-hmm. And also, I don't know, something that I have done that's been very important to me over the last years is the sauna. You have any opinions on that?
I love the sauna, and I love red light therapy, and I love cold therapy. Those, what they call hermetic stressors. So, and basically that your body is we're designed to go through, feast, famine. We're designed to go through hot and cold. And when you expose your body to those different things, what you're doing is telling it to respond to those stressors. And truly, honestly, I gave this talk actually at a very large international meeting of a huge multinational company. And it was the idea that the stress response might be our evolutionary advantage, which of course most people go, you just said stress is bad. I'm like, it is when it's inappropriately managed.
Right.
So one of the things that I think is interesting about sauna and like cold therapy, so cold plunge, is those are short duration. Sauna may be slightly longer, but again, relatively short duration, where you're increasing metabolic rate, you're helping the body sweat, you're giving it a stressor that then causes a relaxation response on the other side, right? So if you look at like some of the sauna and sleep studies and things like that, people's sleep improves, their core body temperature drops more quickly. So that going back and forth helps your mitochondria work better, but it also helps your body reestablish appropriate cortisol stress response, in my estimation, right?
Yeah, I think it's been a game changer, I have to say. I really love it. I definitely feel like in better shape and more relaxed and all of that. And I love the fact I can recommend it to people who, for whatever reason, are unable to move their bodies very much.
Yep.
So it's just another tool that people can use. And I think that's the message. It's like, we don't need to go bonkers on any of these things. It's just because, like I had a gentleman the other day come to me who is doing, just as an example, kale smoothies every morning. And I'm like, okay, just because, maybe doing sauteed kale once a week might be a fine part of your diet. I would not suggest power doing this every single day. And same with, any of these modalities. I mean, the magic of going back to like the exercise and the HIIT training, it's like 2-3 days a week, never do anything 2 days in a row. That because the idea is your body can, adapt, right? I mean, it adapts to it, and then you got to do more to have the same stress response, right?
Yeah, it's adapt and also recovery. We have a tendency to think very type A about it, that we just need to force adaptation, but adaptation only comes after recovery. Right. So we have to have kind of both sides of that. And so, yeah. And you bring up a good point. A lot of people, they want like the bullet. They're like, just give me the magic bullet. And I was like, dude, believe me, if I had the magic supplement, I would be hawking it. Everybody would know. If I had the one thing, there's not one thing. So these things are all part of a bigger lifestyle that allows you to become healthier. So you can't just do one thing. You're not just going to go, okay, I'm going to eat more protein, or I'm going to work out more. I got to do a little bit of all these things. Maybe not everything, but I need to do several things to create a healthy body.
No, absolutely. And you did speak a little bit about sleep, but I think it is huge, huge, huge. So I'd love to hear, obviously why you feel and know it's so significant for our health, but also suggestions you might have for people, because this is a huge issue. Huge.
Oh, it's enormous. It's enormous. So, one of the things that I thought was interesting was, it was probably about 15 years ago, I started reading some of the research that was coming out about sleep apnea, and that sleep apnea shortens your life more than smoking. So on average, sleep apnea will shorten your life 9 years. Smoking is 7. So you can either keep your apnea or smoke a Marlboro, right? I looked at that and I was like, oh my gosh, how is that possible? I go, okay, so that means there's something really bad happening. And then you start really looking at the literature, and it's an independent risk factor for diabetes, obesity, heart disease, Alzheimer's, stroke. Basically, anything that you have, a bad night of sleep is going to be a problem. So apnea is when you stop breathing in the middle of the night, right? It's obstructive. Well, you fast forward a little bit later, so several years later, I've had sleep problems my entire life. And the first time I had a sleep study, I remember I had no apnea events. So I don't snore. It wasn't a snore thing, but I had what they call arousals, right? So spontaneous arousals, an average person will have like 16 to 21. Right. So the first time I had a sleep study, and this is in my 40s, and I'm like, I am going to go nuts because I can't sleep. I'm up all night. And I've always been like that. But when you're younger, you can kind of deal with it. Yeah. And I remember looking at it and they're like, oh, you're fine. And I'm like, well, this arousals per hour says it's 42. They're like, oh, that's fine. Right. So go forward 8 or 9 more years, more research comes out, and there's a condition called upper airway resistance. The reason why I'm saying this, particularly women are going to find this to be more common. Upper airway resistance often occurs for multiple reasons. Number one, as women, our structure of our face and everything is smaller. If you had braces and had stuff removed, right, like teeth, lots of teeth removed and everything kind of reconstructed, what it does, if you were to look at your airway, is in the back of your throat where it goes down, you have a certain size diameter, right? So imagine that's your straw. When you have upper airway resistance, it goes down to a cocktail straw. So it becomes really, really small. Right. So what it does is constrict your airflow. If it constricts it completely, then you have obstruction and you snore and snort and all that other stuff. Well, the restriction of that airflow being just minor, but not completely cut off, causes the arousal centers in the brain to constantly trigger. Right. So the 42 that I had 8 years later goes up to 62. So that means at night, my brain is getting 62 messages an hour that there's something going on. What's going on? What's going on? So my REM sleep was non-existent. I did 2 nights and there was almost no REM sleep, which is where you store memory and focus, right? So was that something that was contributing to my weight? Probably, but it was also contributing at that point to my ability to think. I was thinking, oh my gosh, I must be in menopause and I'm getting early Alzheimer's and all this other stuff. So the reality is I went through dental stuff. So if you go look me up online, you're going to see me with braces. I just had my braces off after 3.5 years of complete reconstruction of my jaw.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, for
I had
airways.
braces as an adult too, about 10 years ago. So there
Yeah,
you go.
so you know what it's like. It's like, but what we doubled my airway basically. So now my airway is wide open. And so now my sleep is better. So I can see the effects personally. So the reality is you
Wow.
don't have to have apnea to have problems.
And this will
And
come up on a sleep test, like a standard sleep test, just for people who are watching.
yes, you want to make sure you get a complete one that gets arousals and apneic events, right? Because most of us, especially women, we often don't have a lot of obstruction. We may have just airway. The other thing that I found really important is that in women, the degree of damage, meaning the metabolic damage, the impact on our health is much greater at lower levels than men. So that means that your sleeping problem is by far more profound at lower levels than somebody else that's a man. And so for women, a lot of times this gets lost. So if you're a woman that goes to sleep but can't stay there, and you wake up all the time, or your memory feels like it's bad, or all of those things, it warrants a sleep study. It warrants a sleep study to see if that's really what's going on. I chose to have dental work, but they can do bite guards and other things that help make sure your airway is open. But this could be part of the major problem with all kinds of symptoms, but also your weight loss resistance.
Yeah. So what do you feel about these people that say that they just need 4 hours or 6 hours sleep? Any thoughts on that? Because I have a couple of them.
Oh yeah. When I was younger, because I never really slept, right? Because by the time my first set of braces were off by 12, I was having pretty major sleep problems. And I was highly energetic, right? So I was like, I'll sleep when I'm dead kind of person. The people that say that are living and loving their stress chemistry. They look, cortisol when it's high generally feels pretty good, right? If anybody's taken like a low dose steroid and they feel kind of good until like they get too high and they feel bad, right? They're running on their adrenaline and they like the way that feels, but the damage is still present. Statistically, the research, if you look at the sleep study research, the less you sleep, the more likely you are to have problems later on and pretty much all health concerns.
No, it makes sense. I actually snore and need to go get tested, although I feel fine, but
and it may not be that bad. Yeah. It may not be that bad.
My husband. Yeah. Maybe the dog, I don't know.
Yeah, for me, it was really profound. I mean, one of the things, so to give kind of context, I was a cyclist. I've been a cyclist off and on, and I hadn't cycled in almost 10 years, right? And so COVID breaks out and I'm like, wow, okay, I've got free time to cycle because you're not going anywhere. I mean, I was working all that time, but on the weekends I couldn't go anywhere. So I got my bike out and I started riding. Well, I'd already gone through palate expansion. So basically grew bone, my face structure changed. And I got on the bike and we're talking 10 years later. And within about 2 weeks, I'm 2 miles an hour faster than I was at my height when I was riding a lot. 10 years later. So I'm older.
Wow.
And it's literally, I was like, because I would feel like I was gassing out, like I was running out of air. I was never good at cardio. I hated cardio. And I'm not a cardio person now, but what it tells you is I had an airway problem. I had a breathing problem that wasn't noticeable because I'm still conscious, but I wasn't getting nearly the same air, right? Nearly the same oxygen content.
Well,
and I still
about all the people that continue to suffer. You're so lucky, obviously with your background to keep, diving into this.
Yeah.
Because I mean, and then I guess while we're on the subject of sleeping, because this is huge as well, and it's your area, the hormones and menopause and night sweats and any of that, any thoughts on that whole thing and what to do? And because I met someone yesterday who said they could not take bioidentical for whatever reason.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, so some people when we go into menopause or perimenopause, replacing hormones makes sense, right? That's the right choice. But for other people, maybe they have strong family history or even personal history of breast cancer, or, there's not everybody needs to go on hormones or should go on hormones. Now, with all that being said, all of the side effects that we feel, the hot flashes, the night sweats, the moodiness, the, memory problems, those are all signs of loss of those hormones. So are there a couple things that we can do? So the first part, night sweats and hot flashes are because our body's thermostat, the hypothalamus, has a control thermostat. We have a low end and a high end. And, what they found is the wider the breadth between those two are, the less likely we are to have hot flashes. So for those of you ladies who have a lot, your body has a real narrow threshold. Well, the estrogen is the controller for the hypothalamus. So when we go into menopause or perimenopause, it's getting stimulated differently and then getting unstimulated. And so we get these wild flashes, right? So there's a drug on the market. As a matter of fact, I had a whole podcast going off about it. that it, why would we create a drug when we have hormones to do it? So there are, so there are drugs that do it, but there are a couple natural substances that work on it too. So there's a product called Estro Vera, and that's EST
Metagenics. Yeah.
or Metagenics, ESTROVERA by Metagenics, which is a herb from a Russian rhubarb plant that hits a receptor called the estrogen receptor B, right? That's the receptor in the hypothalamus that controls thermostat. It is also hormone protective, cancer protective. That receptor is anti-cancer proliferative. So you can take Estrovera, balance your hot flashes. So in the studies that help them go from like 10 to 12 to 1 to 2, right? That'll help. And it's also going to be protective because it's only touching that B receptor. The A receptor, if it gets stimulated, is the ones associated with cancer. So to some degree, I look at it and I go, well, maybe I can take this stuff even if I don't do hormones, and it might help all those symptoms. And I might be doing some good things even if I have some risk factors in my family, right? That's a longer conversation. So that can be helpful. Your adaptogenic herbs, right? So there's a bunch of herbs that are like dong quai, maca, your chasteberry or vitex. They modulate those hormones. So a lot of times we can use some of those and help kind of modulate things a little bit, which makes the fluctuation better. So we get less symptoms, right? Because that's where all those symptoms are coming from. It's that loss of estrogen,
What do you think about something like DIM?
I guess definitely DIM. So DIM, sulforaphane, your hops, your citrus bioflavonoids all change the way estrogen gets detoxed. So it doesn't necessarily, it does a little bit with estradiol. DIM will lower estradiol, but all of those change like the process your body goes through to get rid of estrogens once you're done with them. And so they can change the overall load. So those combinations can also be used especially when things are wildly fluctuating. Now, DIM will lower estrogen, right? Particularly estradiol, which is what's produced by our ovaries. So if somebody's in a really, really low estradiol state, they may not need that, especially if they detox okay, which is a whole nother conversation. So they may not always need DIM, but it can be used particularly like, let's say you're in your 40s and you're in an estrogen dominant state and you're having all that negative side effect, that can be helpful.
I love it. I feel like I have more and more questions for you, but I know I could just talk to you because I was just thinking about estrogen just as an example. And I don't think people realize that there's people put them in one bucket, but there's actually 3 separate kinds of estrogen and they all have different roles and are beneficial. And yes, and all of that stuff. It's just, but people think about it as just being just one bucket.
Yeah.
And people think they don't want it because of breast cancer, but there's some that are protective. And I think it's gotten kind of confusing for people. So I think we'll definitely have to have you back and maybe specifically talk about that and toxins. I would love that.
I'd love to talk about that. Just as an aside, so everybody, if you're a female listening, the NIH convened for the first time on October 18th of last month to actually set aside money to study women's health.
Really?
The research that you guys read up until the late 90s excluded women intentionally. 90% of what we prescribe and tell people to do are based on studies that were men only, unless it's stuff that's come out in the last couple decades. And even then, it's statistically not equal and balanced. So for the first time, they're saying, we're going to study women exclusively to understand, because we're not little men.
Exactly. We're not men. We actually have different hormones and everything else that go on in our bodies. And no, that is great because even I think about, it's like what the 150-pound perfect 20-year-old man, and then we're giving pharmaceuticals to geriatric women, the same medication. Like what is how is that working?
Yeah, can't work.
But
It just doesn't.
And another topic I'd like to talk to. Okay, we're going to lead for the next time, all the genetic testing, because I think that is coming down the pike too with personalized medicine. And I look forward to that. I think that is going to help all this guesswork of just throwing stuff at people and saying it works for, the majority of people in this particular situation. Let's just see what happens with you. Right?
Yeah. Thankfully, the Human Genome Project, has well over 20 years now, closer to 25 years. And the clinical application is great. Not only do we understand how you metabolize drugs and how that's unique, but many of those genes are manipulatable with diet and lifestyle and supplementation, which can help somebody actually take what they're doing and optimize it so they're doing things that their body really needs. And it's available. The hard part is mainstream medicine hasn't joined the party, but it is available for people to use.
Yes, but it's going to be, I think, like you said, more available for mainstream. But in the meantime, I think we can kind of go full circle in our discussion today to say, a good place to start is still, working on your diet, hormones and lifestyle and sleeping. Just the basics, because that's not going to go away.
Yeah, you can't outrun diet, lifestyle, the basics. There's nothing out there that's going to supersede that at this point.
Well, I agree. And thank you so much. This is fantastic discussion and so many nuggets in here. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.